A few weeks ago, the largest box of miniatures I've ever seen arrived at my house. Leviathan is the launch box for the new edition of Warhammer 40,000, and my plan is to build, convert and paint this entire set before the reveal day on the 3rd of June, which is in just a few weeks. Let's get started. First thing you see is all of these sprues. So this is one of the Tyranid sprues. I think this is the Nero. Nope, this is the Screamer Killer and maybe part of the Nero Titan. Maybe it's the Nero Titan and Screamer Killer. This is the Dreadnought. Then we have, I think this is probably the Psychophage. Then we have a sprue of, looks like Termagants. Then we have another sprue of Termagants. This is a sprue of the Flame Guys. Here's another sprue of Flame Guys. Are they the same? Yes. So you have 2 squads of 5 that are identical. Here's the Terminators. They are big. They are big boys. Look at those legs. Look at those fists. Okay, this is going to be tricky. So my plan is to convert these to be in the Deathwatch. And I was gonna scrape off the shoulder pads and attach some of the Deathwatch ones, but I wonder if that's gonna happen now because of how big they are. This is a librarian. Look at that. Oh my god, look at the size of that axe. My Deathwatch thing might be in trouble. I don't think they make shoulder pads big enough for these guys. This is what looks like the winged prime and then also the captain, and he is huge again. Then here are these are the shooty guys and the little neurogaunts or whatever they're called. They're pretty cool. And then this is the new Stern Guard sprue. Wow, that's a densely packed sprue. That's so cool. They're very similar to Blade Guard in terms of their composition. Like you've got the robed one here, but with guns instead. They look incredible. Can't wait to build those. Again, gonna maybe try and convert them to Deathwatch, but we'll see. The one to know is the Terminator shoulder pads fit these guys. This is a Terminator shoulder pad, and this is the shoulder pad of the Sergeant. Maybe. It's hard to tell. It is, I think, definitely slightly bigger, but I don't know if it's too big. So we're gonna have to build them. I think we're gonna have to start by building them. So I started by building the Terminators. I wanted to see if the Deathwatch shoulder pads that I had were gonna fit onto these new Terminator bodies. They are massive, and so I wasn't convinced that they would even look good if it was possible. I carved away a bunch of the surface of the shoulder pad to try and get it to fit on, because unfortunately these shoulder pads are like sort of single piece. You don't get separate shoulder pads for these. This was a massive faff, and at the end of the process, took about 5-10 minutes, I wasn't super happy with how it looked. I thought that the pad was just a bit small, the angle was a little bit awkward, and so I decided that I wasn't going to convert the rest of the Terminators. I decided instead that I would use paint to make them look like they came from the Deathwatch. The exception to this was the captain. I thought that I could add one of the symbols from the vehicle Deathwatch upgrade sprue to the captain's shoulder pad. He is so massive that that symbol fits perfectly on his shoulder pad. So I scraped away all of the existing Crux Terminators, so it was nice and kind of smooth. And then I sort of stuck and bent the icon from the Rhino onto the captain. As you can see, it's massive, but it fits really well. Unfortunately, I didn't have any new ones, so I have to rip this off a Rhino that I already had. And so it isn't perfect, and you'll see when it gets to painting that does impact a little bit the final finish of the model, but I think it looks pretty cool. There was quite a few gaps around the eye, so what I did with him in a little bit is I mixed up some Milliput and I just wet it down and sort of squidged it into the gaps and smoothed it down a bit. So this Milliput, when it's wet, gets really sort of slippy and crumbles quite nicely, but then it sort of dries fairly close to where it was, so you can do that fairly easily. The rest of the building process for the Deathwatch and the Tyranids really was fairly simple. Most of the Space Marines I would just carve away the shoulder after building most of the model and replace it with a Deathwatch pad. And as you can see here, it only took me a few hours to get most of the set ready and built. The Tyranids were similar, they weren't even converted, and so they were really simple to get built as well. The Screamer Killer and the Neurotyrant are so cool. I think my favourite model is the Psychophage. Here is, I think, the whole set ready to get primed. And you can see there's such a lot of models. This was a couple of days after it had been sent to me, and I kind of needed to go this fast because the time would slip away from me. I needed to get the basing done, I needed to get the priming done so that we could start making some progress. I primed the Tyranids with Wraithbone, and I primed the Space Marines in Chaos Black. And now we will get cracking with week 1, where I try to get most of the Gaunts and also the Infernus Space Marines done. So I've documented most of the painting process for the Tyranids for this week, and we started with a base coat of Screaming Skull, because it's just a little bit warmer and nicer than the base coat of Wraithbone, you can see here. I did that over all 30 odd Gaunts, and it took a little bit of time, but I think definitely worth doing. So you can see here, this is all of them with that. And then for the skin tone, I used Vulpus Pink, and it was thinned down a ton with Lamian Medium. Maybe like 6 or 7 to 1 medium to contrast paint. And what this will do is kind of tint the surface a bit, but mostly just settle in the recesses of the skin. And I think that some of them got a bit different consistency to others, but I think that's okay because it just adds like natural variation to the skin of the Tyranids. I also, on some of the Gaunts, especially the Neurogaunts, I added these bright pink panels on some of the armor. The Games Workshop box art has these as well, and I used this across the army to sort of just add another color and sometimes signify that they were part of the Neuro part of the Tyranid thing, which is kind of new. That expansion of the Neuro bit, like Neuro Gaunts, Neuro Tyrant, that kind of thing. I then dry brushed all of the skin with Pallid Witch Flesh, which brought back some of that white, got rid of some of that yellow, and sort of emphasized the pink in the recesses. I then painted all of the rest of the armor panels with Nagaroth Night, which is a nice dark purple. I think I made a mistake with this part, which was shading the Nagaroth Night black on these ones. I think that made the panels too dark, and you'll see on subsequent Tyranids in this force, I didn't do that. I used Striking Scorpion Green contrast paint as my other main spot color, and then I used Corn Red as the base coat for the guns and also for all of the claws. Again, this is a fairly standard, I guess, Hive Fleet Leviathan scheme. Here I am painting thinned down Black Legion as a black shade over all of the armor panels, and like I said, I think that this was a mistake, and it actually would have been better to just do a solid base coat of Nagaroth Night and then dry brush up from there, or highlight up from there. Here I am highlighting with, I think, Xerius Purple to do the armor panels. I realized very quickly that this is going to take too long if I highlight each panel individually, and I do end up sort of over brushing / dry brushing these later on, because this here took a few minutes. So here is the panels with the first highlight. As you can see, that purple is almost black in those recesses, and I didn't really like it. So I do change that for future. I highlight the red claws a couple of times. On some of them, they end up getting an orange highlight as well, and on others, it's just a couple of red highlights, just to bring out the color in that. Each time you add a color to these guys, it's a process that takes quite a lot of time. And so over these first Gaunts, and this is one of the reasons I did the Gaunts first, I'm streamlining, I'm figuring out what colors I can skip, what parts I can do faster, to try and make sure that for the rest of the Tyranids, I can get the scheme completed in less time, because I don't have a whole lot of time per model, probably up to about half an hour per model if I want to get the set done in time for the reveal day, which is coming up. So here is all of the Gaunts basically done. I had to do a couple more details, like the skin color in the mouths, the green eyes on the guns and their eyes as well, which again I did Striking Scorpion Green, but I'm pretty pleased with them. I really like the Neurogaunts. I'm less happy with the Termagaunts, but I do still quite like them. So this is the end of week 1 of my painting. I also painted the 10 Deathwatch guys in this week, which I didn't really document because I document the Terminators as I do next, and all of the colours are basically done the same. But the Deathwatch guys I think look really cool, and you'll see how I painted them in just a moment. These are the gaunts that we just did, and they look really quite nice as well. I can't remember exactly how many hours I am in after this first week, probably about 8 to 10, and so to get everything done in 3 weeks, if I do about the same, I'll hit my goal of about 30 hours. So, week 2 is Terminators, and then the rest of the units for the Tyranids, so the little Lictor guys, the Shooty guys, some Rippers, and also this Psychophage, which I think is my favourite model from the set. And then I'm also doing the Terminators, and I also sort of started the Dreadnought this week as well. So, let's look at how I painted the Deathwatch. I started with an Abaddon black base coat. Does it make too much of a difference? I don't know, maybe, but all the tutorials say that to go over your black spray with Abaddon black, and so I kind of did. It makes me feel like more of a painty person than just a speed painter. I then did an overbrush of Stegodon scale green over all of the black armor. I found when I did this on the first set of units that I didn't go hard enough, and then when I did my black wash, I erased everything, and so I went a bit harder with the Stegodon scale green here. I repeated the dry brushing with Thunderhawk blue and then Fenris grey, going a bit lighter and focusing on sort of the tops halves of all the surfaces. When I finished, I actually really like this colour, so I don't know, maybe in the future there's going to be some sort of army that I'm going to do that's in this colour, but it has added a lot of depth, a lot of colour, and a lot of texture to the armour as well. So here you can see the finished look without any washing. We could leave it here, but I am going to shade it back down. So I get some contrast, Black Legion, I thin it down just with water. It's a bit of a trial and error as to how much you should thin it down, but I thinned it down quite a bit and put it all over the model. The reason that we use contrast rather than a shade is because I am trying to tint the surfaces, not just go into the recesses. I'm trying to make the whole thing darker, and so I go over the whole model with this thin down paint. Some of them look a bit different, some of them look a bit less black, some of them look a little bit more black, but when they dry they look quite good and they're a quite nice deep black. The dry brushing, because I've thinned it a bit more than I did for the first unit, the dry brushing adds quite a lot without getting rid of all the colour in the recesses and on the surfaces. But it's not completely done, because what I want to do is just add a little bit more highlighting back to the surfaces of the model. And so what I'm going to do is just grab some Fenris Grey and kind of dry brush, kind of sort of lightly edge highlight the edges of the black armor to bring back a little bit more contrast and a little bit of highlighting. And to also, in some places, add not just a dry brush, but sort of a little bit of speckling, a little bit of texture, a little bit of just making the armor look a bit more interesting. Here's a photo of my first attempt for this versus the latest one. They look quite similar in the end, but you can see that the one on the left has much less depth to the black. For the Dreadnought, I didn't think that washing all over was going to work, so what I did is just a really light dry brush of all three colours. It really helped that the Dreadnought has lots of angular straight surfaces, and so a nice light dry brush of the main three colours gave me all the depth and colour that I needed without having to then go in and wash over these large surfaces, because I just thought it wouldn't be consistent enough. The other main colour on the models is going to be this really bright silver for the arms, and I started with a base coat of Iron Hand Steel for that, which is a really lovely colour. I used Iron Warriors to paint the rest of the silver details, so they will be darker, they will be more muted, but the arms will be really, really bright. And then there's just a few other base coats on these Terminators. They're very simple models. We've got Retributor Gold for some of the gold details. We've got Mephiston Red as a base coat for some of the red details. And then we just have to paint the shoulder pads. So for all of the shoulder pads, I'm going to paint them in the same way, just with different colours, which will be a base coat of quite a strong colour, and then a quick recess shade, and then an edge highlight of a brighter colour. I've gone for really classic chapters like Blood Angels, Salamanders, Space Wolves, Imperial Fists, and Dark Angels for these guys. And I think this adds just another pop of colour. The arms are then base coated again with Vallejo Silver, and this is, I think, steel or aluminium, and that just builds up the brightness to a much higher degree. Then I'm going to do some shades. I used Caribou Crimson to shade the red. I used a thinned down contrast paint Talasar Blue to shade all of the silver parts on the bright silver arms. I wanted to add a bunch of contrast and make these arms really stand out. And then I went over the arms with a dry brush of that bright silver to take some of the blue out of the raised surfaces, leaving it just in the recesses. I'm just highlighting the shoulder pads very quickly with a brighter color for each of them, sort of one stage brighter. I do an edge highlight and then another sort of little layery highlight over the top portion as well. I'm using Evil Sun Scarlet for the red, and then I paint the lenses white, and then I paint them with a dark blue paint as well. Just some other quick highlights on the purity seals using a lighter bone color, and then here is edge highlighting the Space Wolf, and again putting a little bit more color in with Fenris Grey to the top half and kind of feathering that out a bit to a little bit of a blend, but not really. It's very, very simple. I'm going to be adding transfers, so a lot of this gets covered, and so I don't need to be particularly careful or neat. I paint the power sword of the Sergeant using Athematic Blue and then highlighting it with Grey Seer. And then I think that's most of the colors done on these guys. One last thing that I wanted to show is this muzzle burn effect. You'll see that I've done it across a lot of the army. And so this is done using just 2 contrast paints, Luxian Purple and Azurman Blue. So you start with purple and you go about halfway down the bronze barrel, and you feather it out. And then you also do Azurman Blue on top of that once it's dry, and feather that out again, but only go about a quarter of the way down the barrel. And once that's dried, it gives this really, really nice muzzle burn effect, especially on a bronze or brass looking barrel. I think it looks incredible and adds another splash of color across the army. So this is after 2 weeks of painting. You see I've painted a bunch of the Tyranids, and then I've painted the Terminators as well. The Tyranids, I just used the same techniques as I used to paint the Gaunts, so we'll see them in more detail at the end. But here is my progress so far after 2 weeks of painting, and I'm not 100% sure exactly how many hours are in on this point. It's probably about 15 or 16, so about an hour a night I ended up doing. And so yeah, so we'll move on to the third and final batch of models. The models on the desk here are everything that I need to finish this week, and I didn't really film an awful lot of this. Partly they just got away from me, and partly because I wasn't doing an awful lot of techniques that were that different. One thing that I really, really wanted to do was add something to each of the characters to make them stand out. And so I tried on the Librarian to add white ink into all of the recesses and then go over it with blue. You'll see at the end that it didn't work that great. I wasn't able to be neat enough to put the white ink exactly where I needed it to be. I'm not the neatest of painters, but I do end up painting blue over all of these details and then dulling it back down. I painted a really cool power sword on the captain. You can see that we're much further ahead now, and this is the next clip after that Librarian one, so I did unfortunately forget to film quite a lot of my final week's progress. But you'll see the models finished at the end, and there aren't any techniques really that I did that weren't covered in the previous clips, but I did spend a little bit longer on the captain, making sure that all my base coats were perfect, and adding in a few extra layers and doing obviously the red cloak as well, which is I've covered in previous videos of how I did that. And then this is basically when we were almost done with the entire set at the end of that week. I think it looks incredible. I've added transfers. I've painted the bases a nice reddy brown for the Deathwatch and the nice grey for the Tyranids. I think at this point with these clips, I just have to go in and rim all the bases with black to really finish off and frame the models. So that is the last step that I need to do. And this is the set entirely painted. And so it took me just over 3 weeks to do all of this painting. And if I look at my timer, because I did time fairly religiously, I think it took me about 34 hours to paint the entire set in total. And so that's about an hour and a half a night, maybe a bit more at the weekends. But I think that the set came out incredibly well. I love most of the models in the set, and I really like all of them. And I think that for the time put in, and definitely for the effort and fun that I had, these guys look great. Some of the colors really pop. I particularly love the red claws, I love the green highlights on the tyranids, and then I love the bright silver arms and the all of the chapter badges on the Deathwatch. So I'm just going to quickly go through each of the models. This is the Deathwatch Captain. He is a Black Templar and I absolutely adore him. He's my favourite model from the set. Here we have the Apothecary, and he looks really cool as well. I'm not entirely sure what chapter he's from, but he is there. The Librarian, and you can see sort of the subtle blue in the recesses there. It didn't come out quite as I liked, but it looks great. The Tyranid armor panels on this Lieutenant I think look incredible. I love the feature of that model. Here's the Dreadnought finished off. I think this model is so good. A really cool update for the original las cannon and missile launcher Dreadnought. Here's those Terminators that we saw before. These guys are really cool as well. Some of my favorite models from the whole set. Here's the Stern Guard. I didn't end up loving these. I think they're fine, but I didn't love them as much as I thought I would want painting them. They're a bit generic. Here are my 10 Flamer guys with that amazing muzzle burn effect over the end of all of the barrels, and I think they look really cool as well. I love the variety of their chapter symbols. Here is the Winged Tyranid Prime. He's really cool. He's not my favorite model from the set for the Tyranids, but I think that he's a cool leader. Here is the Neuro Tyrant and his little bomb spore guys. I think he's one of my favorite models. I love the green brain and just how wacky he is. Very Mars Attacks in vibe. This is the Psychophage. I think he is my favorite model of all of the Tyranids. I think he looks great, and I love the green smoke stacks that I did and the big mouth. The Screamer Killer, I think needs another color if I go back to these guys. I think I would add a second color, like a green or something in somewhere else. Similarly with these guys, I think they need more green to make them pop. These are the little mini Lictor guys. These guys are my least favorite models in the whole set, I think. The Tyranid cannon guys, just they're a bit flat and I don't really like their poses. I do like the gaunts. I think again, if I did them again, I would try and add more green or more bright pink because I think those make the army pop. The little Ripper guys look fine. I don't really know what old Rippers look like, but these feel like a little bit of an upgrade, probably a bit bigger. And then these are the Neuro Gaunts, which are my favorite of all the troops. I think I like their little leader guy. I would have a whole squad of that leader guy as well. And then the little guys are also really cool as well. So yeah, so this is just some quick size comparisons. The models are bigger, they're quite a lot bigger, and it's interesting to watch and look at them. Here is the Captain with some older Terminators and the new Terminator as well, quite a bit bigger, especially if you look at the old Assault Cannon guy. Here are some Terminators with some of the just Primaris guys. They're basically in scale with Primaris, and here's the Terminator Captain with the Gravis Captain, the Gravis Primaris Captain, and he's about the same size. The biggest shock and the funniest thing is the size comparison with the Dreadnought. So here he is with a Chaos War Dog, almost the same size, and then here he is with a classic Dreadnought, and I think this is hilarious just how much bigger this is, almost twice the size. On the Tyranid sides, they're more consistent I think. I don't think they're that different. We've got the Broodlord, we've got the Neuro Tyrant, and we've got the Screamer Killer with the Chaos War Dog, and he's quite big as well. So I'm super happy with how this entire project went. I think that in particular the Deathwatch are an incredible force that I've added to my army now, and all the models I'm really happy with. The Tyranids maybe are slightly less so. I think that they are definitely speed painted. You can tell that a bit more than with the Deathwatch, but I think that's fine. As I said, total time was about 34-35 hours, which comes out to about just under 30 minutes per model on average. Obviously, some of them took way longer than that, and some of them probably took less. The characters a little bit more. And I've added here in my Deathwatch with some of my older Deathwatch models. You can see the updates in detail, you can see the updates in the painting style, but they do fit, and I think that these models work really nicely as Deathwatch models. If you told me that this set was a Deathwatch Kill Team starter set, I don't think that I would be, it wouldn't take too much to make me believe you that these are in fact models that were made for the Deathwatch, not generic Space Marines. So yeah, this has been my Leviathan first look and I guess paint through. We'll finish off with this rotating shot of the Captain that I just really adore. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, I know it's a bit longer than normal. Don't forget to give it a like, and I will see you in the next video.